upon us. It's beautiful. The sun's out. The snow's, there's little bits of snow left on the floor here. I don't know if you see it on the ground. I don't know if you hear the kite. I want to talk about one of the bottlenecks that is affecting entrepreneurs, right? There are three bottlenecks. I'm going to do this talk is going to be solely on the first bottleneck, which is unrealistic expectations that private equity and other groups place on entrepreneurs. And there's a really good talk by, I think it's David Rose, who's a venture capitalist, about what private equity is looking for in a founder. I'm not sure if I'll be able to rattle them all off, but there's like 10 talents that they're looking for. Now, you have to understand, if you look at every significant entrepreneur out there, from Facebook to Google to Apple, right? If you look at every single one of those defining entrepreneurs, and even if you go back into history and you look at, for example, famous musicians and artists and, even inventors or someone like Tesla and others, if you look at these guys and gals and you compare them to this list, you'll find that none of them met the requirements of David Rose, right? And ultimately, it's because of these unrealistic expectations that we place on entrepreneurs that we don't fund them. And as a result of not funding them, their innovation doesn't happen, or it happens late. And I'll give you an example. I mean, the fax machine was discovered 100 years ago, but it didn't, take effect until much later. You look at the Industrial Revolution started in the 1700s. Well, the steam engine was invented in the 1400s. Just about every innovation that has come to light, I mean, even look at like video conferencing and everything else, that's been around for 20 years, right? It was ahead of its time because we didn't have the connectivity to take advantage of it. Now we do. So now the market's in place. And if you look at there's a formula for success. And the formula for success is money, right? Access to money, the right team, the right market conditions, all right? The simple fact is money is only good if you have that innovation, right? So innovation, successful innovation equals money plus team plus market. A team, it's simple to assemble. Recruiters, I was a recruiter, we assemble teams all the time. And the challenge thing is the right market conditions. However, if you look at things like the personal computer that Jobs basically, pioneered, you can't do market research, as Jobs explains. You can't, if you're dealing with the new markets and creating new markets, basically, you have to go with assumptions and gut feeling and everything else because there's nothing to go by, right? As he explains, as Jobs explains, I mean, unless someone, market research only works if you're trying to improve on something, right? If something doesn't exist, the personal computer didn't exist prior to the Apple II. Not as a ubiquitous, computing unit, which had its hard drive and this and keyboard and all this stuff, right? And he assembled all these pieces together and created a new product called a PC. So, and if you looked at, and if you watch his videos and stuff, you'll know that one is he never wanted to, it wasn't his goal to start a computer company. He only did it because he had no choice. And two, he had no interest in building a PC market. He wanted to build computers for his friends. That was it. So that's how Apple got going. And, and when it comes to marketing, he saw someone that he liked in marketing, and he contacted the guy, and that's the guy who did the marketing for him. So ultimately, these unrealistic assumptions, or that we place on entrepreneurs, is one of the reasons why we don't fund them. As a result of not funding them, they can't bring their innovations together, they can't hire the team, they can't create the new markets, and they can't create new jobs. So it's basically this problem. So how, the opportunity is I believe that once we realize this this problem of this unrealistic funding expectations, then we can start actually analyzing and actually figuring out a way to overcome them. Now, I'll explain to you how we overcome them. Basically, we look at those expectations, and they have a value within our ubiquitous framework, right? And as a value, through something called the Open Incubator Framework, OIF, depending on what people do or don't do, kind of like a leveling up a character in a game, you're actually going to gain skill levels. Not only that, we actually can look at your resume, look at your past experience, and actually give you a base yard. So obviously someone coming in who is a director of business development for an Inc. 100 company like I was, versus a kid, versus a guy who's just, hey, I'm going to do a Shakespeare festival and have none of that experience, would be start at a different base level. You could look, that was me too. A guy who's raised over $7 million for nonprofits, right? That's me. And versus a guy who had never raised anything, right? And launched the Shakespeare Festival, that was me too. Different stages, right? And ultimately, how do you measure integrity? I mean, integrity. They're looking for someone with integrity. How do you measure that? How does a private equity person decide someone's integrity or not? Well, I believe in integrity. If you have an open corporation, if you're dealing with transparency, then you're dealing with someone who has a high integrity, right? What I have done with the Open Startup is that as part of OIF, an open startup is a startup anyone can join. That's an open startup. A found up is an open startup using my framework called the Open Incubator Framework, OIF. At a certain point, from validating to team building, open startups, found ups, okay, become open corps, right? You start to set up your open corp. Now, you don't actually become an open corp. You kind of start setting it up, right? You start setting up your bylaws and everything else, and this is actually a function of our ubiquitous software that does this. Ultimately, in doing this, what happens is it will then start defining the types of people you attract. Because because when you start defining how your corporation is going to run, you're going to get a very clear understanding of the type of person who that leader is, okay, by the way he sets it up. Because ultimately, this is what's going to define the organization moving forward. So something like integrity we can handle by bringing about a framework for managing teams and leadership and everything else, and by providing opportunity for people to give feedback on these individuals as they, as they develop and they work on their, on their idea. So another, how do you measure commitment? I'm a kid wanting to launch this idea. Where's commitment, right? Versus here's a guy, for example, I launched the whole idea of education using information technology, Eduit, in 2001, dealing with game-based education, and AI in 2001. Was the market ready in 2001? No. Is the market ready today? It may be getting there, right? Is the market ready for an autonomous, learning solution on smart devices? I think so. Now, ultimately, here's something that I've spent pretty much over 10 years, wanting to bring about, but unable to because, again, I lack the tools to bring about. So what I did was out of a selfish desire, last year I started working, or 2 years ago I started working on OIF, the Open Incubator Framework. So, you know, how do you measure commitment? Well, you can look at how long someone's worked for in a company. You can look at, you know, kind of how long their attention span is on a specific thing or whatever, and you can determine that commitment. That can be a measurable number. So each and every one of these components, leadership and, skills and knowledge and all these different things ultimately are measurable units that within a platform, within a framework, can be measured to one degree or another. And the way we measure is our secret sauce. That's OIF, right? That's, you know, our game system. The way that, you know, you don't know how the Google code works. You won't know how OIF works. That's our secret sauce. So ultimately, we can remove these unrealistic expectations, and we can supplement them by providing a platform that does it for you. My name is Michael Trout, and I am the founder of the Open Startup, and I'm looking to help my fellow entrepreneurs succeed at what they're doing, and to bring about the entrepreneur revolution that is just getting started, and to bring about significant innovation worldwide in order to solve the problems facing humanity. Because the bottom line is, if we do not solve these problems, we are in a big mess, right? And anyone who's basically focused on global climate change, anyone who's focused on forced fishery depletions or extinction, forced deforestation, water crisis, food, environment, everything. There are so many challenges facing humanity right now, and the only ones who are going to solve these problems are the innovators that represent less than 2.5% of the population. Okay? And the only way we're going to help those innovators is by providing them a ubiquitous solution that's going to allow them to launch their ideas without having to contend with bottlenecks, right? Unrealistic bottlenecks. And my next talk is going to be on the funding bottleneck. Thanks.